In this video, Ginger Shultz examines the impact of VoiceThread, an online discussion tool, on students' learning of spectroscopy in an organic chemistry course. She describes the use of a pre- and post-term assessment that included problems that were similar to homework problems and an additional question asking students to explain how they got their answer. This project is a good example of how instructors may wish to use comparison groups to better understand how their learning objectives make a difference in student learning.
So one of the things also that's really great about VoiceThread that was the most helpful in a large class is that as the instructor, I could go on to and look at the sites for each different lab section and sort of sample all of the discussions. And unlike any other method that I've used before, it gave me a really good idea of how the students were viewing a particular problem. So that was especially useful. So that was our general plan, and we implemented this on a small scale last year in fall 2011. There is a lower enrollment in 216 in the fall, so that was a natural place to start. We started in 3 lab sections, and that's about 47 students, and that became our treatment group. So all of the students in the course did the same types of spectroscopy problems for their homework. But the treatment group would have access to the screencast tutorials. They would do the documented problem solving, and they would be organized into groups for regular discussions on VoiceThread. So one of the ways that we wanted to assess the efficacy of our learning objects was this specially designed pre-post term assessment. So essentially we're using the same type of problem that they would see in homework or see on an exam, but we've added a second component that asks them to explain their solution. Because we felt that in an exam or getting a correct answer doesn't necessarily equal a good understanding of the concepts. So we wanted to dig into their brains a little bit more, and so we added this second component. So this is the results of that assessment, and so we looked at both the percentage of correct answers and also at the written explanations. And as you can see, the treatment group had much more success in obtaining a correct answer, and they also provided much more thorough explanations on the assessment. So I'm going to explain how we coded that explanation because that was kind of interesting to us. We decided not just to look at non-answers versus answers or really look into it that way. We felt that there was kind of a middle ground where some students were providing what we called a limited explanation. And so an example would be, I know this isn't the right answer. So there's a lot of value in there. There's value in that, in understanding whether or not your answer is correct. That is some degree of knowledge. So we thought that that was important. And then to us, a really thorough explanation was something that had sophisticated and specific observations and analysis included in that explanation. And of course, we saw a lot more of that as we had hoped. Okay, so one additional thing that we did, of course, we did surveys, and those were largely positive, and we asked the students to comment. And so they agreed that it was generally useful and helped them in preparing for exams, and that forcing themselves to have to speak through the problem aloud was a good thing, and that they liked looking at the responses that other students had posted. So that seemed to work so well that we decided to go ahead and jump into the deep end of the pool and implement this in winter term, and that's when we have the highest enrollment in the course. And so we implemented in about a third of the course. That's 19 of the lab sections and about 269 students. So this was a lot more complex, as you can imagine, and we really didn't get the kind of traction on these that we had experienced in the fall. But we did see similar results in the spectroscopy assessment, similar results in this survey, but the spectroscopy assessment, we didn't see a statistical difference between the participating and non-participating students. So at that time, we decided that we needed to look at the C-Tools usage data in order to look at it from a different angle. So this is one of the things that we looked at. So we looked at exam performance relative to how often the students had used the learning objects. So both the VoiceThread and the screencasts were linked out through C-Tools, so we could monitor their usage over the term. And so this the second exam, which has more spectroscopy content in it, but it is not entirely spectroscopy. So you have to keep that in mind. But there was a positive correlation here showing us that increased learning object usage had a positive impact on their performance on the exam. So we also looked individually at spectroscopy questions. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see an easy spectroscopy question, and on the right-hand side, a difficult spectroscopy question. So you can see that there's more of a correlation for the difficult spectroscopy question, and so that suggests to us that these learning objects help them to be more successful on the more difficult problems.